Tantor Audio, a division of recorded books, presents A Cat's Guide to Bonding with Dragons by Behrsin. Narrated by Lloyd Davies. 1. The Tower. My story doesn't start, unfortunately, in the hills of South Wales, where I once had a good life, dashing through the long, dry summer grass, chasing butterflies with the heat from the sun beating against my fur. It doesn't start eating salty tuna straight out of the can every Sunday morning, and the remains of roasted chicken in the afternoon. Nor does it start with me propped up against a velvet cushion that was tossed onto the sofa as I watched Tom chasing Jerry on television, amazed and slightly offended at how stupid the creators made Tom. Instead, it starts on a muggy day, where the only way of telling the weather was the pressure on the sides of my head and the moisture I could sense in my whiskers. It starts in a stone tower with no windows, built of roughly hewn stones, sealed together with magic rather than mortar. It starts trapped under the service of an evil warlock who teleported me into a world and back to a time where humans only kept cats like me to chase mice and rats. I'm not a usual cat, either in these magical lands or my original home. I'm a Bengal, meaning I'm larger than your average house cat, but not as large as a savannah cat, two of whom inhabited my previous neighborhood. Nor am I as large as that beast of a cat called a Maine Coon that I saw once on television. That was the biggest domestic cat I'd ever seen. But I am a descendant of the great Asian leopard cat, which makes me special in my own right. My fur is a kind of amber color, and I have these black patches on me. If you caught a leopard cub in the warm light of sunset, maybe I'd look a little similar. Except I'm not quite as lazy as a leopard, and not quite so stupid as to start a fight with a wildebeest. Also, don't mistake me for a tabby, a calico, or a tortoiseshell. Those are the three worst things you can call a Bengal. I'm proud of my heritage and the way I look. I have a name, but there's no way you'll be able to pronounce it in your language. You think Russian's hard, then try hissing and sputtering and mewling out one of our long names. The humans called me Ben, as I'm a Bengal, imaginative as they were. The younger kid had a little more imagination and decided that because of my breed I should be called Benji. He was cute, that one, when he didn't try throwing me around the room. I won't tell you much more about my life back in Wales because it's probably uninteresting to human ears. Instead, I'll tell you about the evil warlock who whisked me away across time and space from a nutritious breakfast of milk and salmon trimmings, right into the center of a pentagram drawn in red chalk on his floor. His name was Astravar, though I only learned of his name later. Like many men of misery, he liked to keep himself neat, not letting a single bobble of fluff grace his purple cloak, and always ensuring his collar kept as straight as still water. He had a long face, so gaunt you could see the bones underneath his eyes, cheeks, and chin. He had cruel grey eyes without a tint of colour in them, incredibly unnatural for a human. At first I looked up at him in shock. Then I thought, might as well make the most of it. Maybe at least I could get this strange man to pet me. So I mewed for a little comfort. And you know what he did? He slapped me in the face. I was quick to react, and I swiped at him with my right paw, scratching through his trousers. That was when he dragged me over to this tiny and cramped cage, and he locked me in there for 2 days straight without food and water. At least I think it was 2 days. There was no way of telling when day moved to night in that place. When Astravar went out, I remained there in complete darkness, so cramped I couldn't even pace, my paws cold against the floor. without a blanket for comfort, where I could just feel the cockroaches crawling all over my paws and I couldn't do anything about them. Those were the worst 2 days of my life. You can probably imagine the rest of my life there wasn't easy either. Fastravar eventually let me out of the cage, but he never let me outside. And he kept the room so pitch black when he went out during the day that I couldn't see a thing, even with cat vision. Meanwhile, I would lie there on the thin mattress on the bedstead in this circular room, mewling away, hoping someone would pass by this tower, take pity, and knock down the door and steal me away. All the dust in here just made me sneeze all the time. Fastravar didn't leave food in a bowl on the floor, not even that cheap processed meat stuff. Not that they had it in his day. And I couldn't help but long for tuna, salmon, and roasted chicken, and other delicious feasts that my previous owners would spoil me with every day. He didn't even leave proper water down, just some algae-infested swill from the bottom of some dirty pond. In all honesty, I don't know where he got the water from. Maybe it had magical properties. Maybe if I drank enough of it, I'd be able to grow wings and fly. But where would I go? Like I said, this tower didn't have any windows, so I couldn't even sit on the sill and gaze out at the wilderness. Fastravar often went out foraging during this time, and he'd come back with a bag full of things like mandrake roots, deadly nightshade, and all kinds of other plants you wouldn't dare touch with a paw, let alone a whisker. Other days he'd bring back heavy, shiny rocks, like the one that hung above his enchantment table. Each time he'd bring home all this stuff for who knows what nefarious intention, and he didn't even think to throw in a sprig of catnip. Then he'd work under the light of a transparent crystal above a stone table engraved with red, yellow, and purple runes. This crystal hung too far out of reach for me to access, unfortunately. It would shine bright white, allowing him to get to work grinding his herbs with a mortar and pestle, etching more runes into the table, and hammering at shiny rocks, making a racket far too intense for my sensitive ears. It wasn't terrible living in Astravar's tower for the first week or so. There were mice here, lots of them. Mind you, with the way this place had been put together with stones thrown one on top of the other, there were plenty of places for mice to hide. They hid in holes underneath the spinning wheel, behind the cold obsidian stone of the enchantment table, underneath the bed frame. Full of nasty splinters, that one. There was even one in the pantry, which is the worst place to have a mouse hole, if you ask me, particularly in a world where they haven't yet invented tin cans. That's probably why Astravar summoned me here, and, being a good cat, I got rid of them pretty quickly. I even ate a few of them, because I was hungry. Mouse tastes okay, but I can't stand all those sharp bones in awkward places. To be honest, I also prefer my meat cooked. You would have thought a wizard would be selective about who he brought into his abode. Well, he was really, other than the mice and the cockroaches, and the single rat who made it up there one morning. The rat didn't find his way through a hole, a window, because I already told you there weren't any, or even the front door. It found its way through a portal that Astravar summoned in that same pentagram he'd brought me through, bang in the center of the tower. Oh, and I didn't tell you it was a demon rat. That's right, a demon rat that I had to kill 9 times. But that demon rat was only the first of them. After I had killed it, Astravar seemed to think it a good idea to summon more of them from his portals. Each day, after returning from his foraging, he'd enter his pentagram and mutter some strange words. Then the portal would open up, only for a few seconds, mind, but it was enough for those infernal rats to swarm out of them. Then I'd have to go chasing after them and beating them down. It was exhausting, I tell you. By the end of it all, I just wanted to collapse on the bed. Then Astravar would sweep them all into some kind of open closet that he never let me anywhere near. Really, he must have picked up thousands of those demon rats after a while, and their bodies never seemed to decay. I got no rewards for my efforts, no extra smoked salmon or chicken liver or anything like that. Trust me, I really didn't want to be eating any of those demon rats. Anyway, here I am, rabbiting on. Don't you just love rabbits? About the terrible life I had in the tower, when I have so much else to tell. My story really starts one day when Astravar came home from his foraging. He'd just been picking some kind of mushrooms from a nearby cave, and the spores must have made him a little drowsy, so he neglected to close the door properly. I admit it, I thought twice about sneaking out the door, as I wasn't sure how long the mushroom spell would last on Astravar. If he woke up and saw that his prized Bengal was missing, he might hunt me down and turn me into a mouse or a frog, and then feed me to another cat. Perhaps even one he teleported across time and space to hunt the demon rats he accidentally let through his portals. He'd probably pick an even bigger cat, just because Astravar liked to be ironic. I'm guessing he'd choose a Maine Coon. But then it would be an equally fitting end to die of starvation in some conceited warlock's tower. And that thought made me bat open the heavy wooden door with my paw, slide out the gap, and make my way down the cold stone spiral staircase. I squeezed through the cold iron bars of the gate at the bottom of the tower, and I sprinted out into a cruel and unfamiliar world. 2. The Sprint. I didn't just run. I sprinted like a jaguar. I let my two hind legs carry me across the ground, imagining myself back in the jungles my ancestors came from, or dashing across the plains like the cheetahs the savannah cats from my South Wales clouder claimed inhabited their ancestral lands. I didn't halt once to look over my shoulder, mind. There's no better way to kill momentum than to stop looking where you're going and then tumble into a rock or trip over a lump in the ground. A strange purple mist enveloped the land, smelling more of death and decay than anything natural. The air here felt almost choking, and I found it difficult to breathe. But still, I soldiered on. The ground beneath me wasn't great for running. It was marshy and cold. The water came up to my knees in places. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't go near such a place, even if I knew a vast field of catnip lay on the other side of it. But then, anywhere was better than that tower. My legs got tired after a while, but I didn't stop. I doubted that the mage could outrun me, but he might send something after me that could. A demon cheetah, perhaps. Or he could even use that portal to cross time and space and materialize right in front of me. I didn't know which possibility I feared more. Fortunately, nothing came, and soon enough I managed to get out of the terrifying place. The sun also broke out of a thick grey layer of clouds. The sensation of warmth against my fur and naked nose after so long without it caused me to slow a little. I found myself on much firmer ground, thick with long dry grass and rich in pollen. Dragonflies buzzed around overhead, and I spent a little while chasing some of them. But after running for so long I tired quickly, and so I lay down to have a little snooze in the sun. It was then that I noticed something wheeling by overhead. Now, back in South Wales, our little clouder had a rule. Everything that flew was good for hunting as soon as it landed. We didn't have eagles or hawks or anything like that in South Wales, so nothing in the sky would get us into any danger, except perhaps an occasional aggressive seagull. But the thing that cast a shadow over me was enormous, to say the least. Even being Whiskers knows how many miles up in the sky, it still looked bigger than me. It had these long wings like those of a goose, but much broader and webbed rather than feathered. As it passed by, it let off a roar that cut apart the sky. The creature had come from a snow-capped mountain range in the distance, much more impressive than the Brecon beacons back in Wales. I yawned, deciding that as long as that creature didn't mind me, I wouldn't mind it either. So I closed my eyes and I slept fitfully, occasionally waking from nightmares of Astravar dropping out of a portal and putting me in that horrible cage again. But after a while the dreams also faded away, and I awoke underneath the amber glow of the setting sun, which caused the high strands of grass around me to cast long shadows. That was when I decided it was a good idea to go hunting. I wasn't sure what I was in the mood for then, but regardless, there was no running water nearby, so I wouldn't have a chance of catching any fish. Unless I went back to the marshland, of course, which I wasn't going to do for obvious reasons. I tried chasing some starlings, but they lifted themselves up from the ground whenever I got within a few yards of them. Instead, I scouted around for voles or mice. That's the thing, though. Small rodents are easy to hunt indoors. You just trap them inside their holes and scoop them out with a paw. But outside they had places to run to, so the tiny critters would just scramble away. After a while of stalking across the land looking for food, I came across a rock over what looked like moist ground, just next to an oak tree. I was desperate, so I turned it over, to find it crawling with earthworms and woodlice. They didn't make for a particularly appetizing meal. I hated eating creepy crawlies, but they satisfied the hunger pangs somewhat. That was how I lived for the next several days or so, eating insects and worms from underneath the earth, carrying on across the land hungry and tired, but at least grateful to once again be able to see the sun rise and set. I tried to travel and hunt at night, but the night didn't reward my hunting. I could swear there was something about the mice and rabbits here. They just knew to stay well away from me, as if they had greater dangers to deal with than a mere cat. They dug deeper into their burrows and curved their holes down into the ground so I couldn't reach into them successfully. During the day I slept in the long grass. Occasionally one of those strange and massive beasts flying overhead would wake me from my slumber, always either going to or coming from the mountains, and always flying in the same direction. When I saw them from the right angle, I would imagine something was sitting on top of them, perhaps a human in bright clothing. But I thought it must be my imagination. I was hallucinating, and it wouldn't do me any good. After a while of living this way and the intense hunger pang in my stomach, I could literally feel my ribs pressing out against my chest. I realized my problem then. I needed to be around humans, and I'd lived without them for far, far too long. It was ridiculous, I know. A great beast like me, a Bengal, not being able to hunt for himself. But I had to face the facts. I was domesticated, not bred to live in such a wild world. Yet there was no way I would turn back to the marshlands to live with Astravar. Whiskers, if I returned there asking for food and a ticket back to my owners in South Wales, he'd probably skin me alive. Still, I had no idea where I would find a town, or a city, or any place where I could find a nice family to feed me. I only had one lead: the massive creatures that flew overhead, always coming from one direction towards the mountains in the morning and returning the other way in the evening. It was then that I decided that I'd follow their trail and find out where they were all returning to. 3. The Castle. The trail led me to a mound with what looked like a castle on top of it. Back in South Wales we had a castle nearby on top of a hill. But while the one back home was in ruins, with stones that had crumbled apart hundreds of years ago, and no one living there save for the occasional badger and hedgehog, this castle was teeming with life. It wasn't ruined for a start, and had these tall towers, 6 of them in fact, that rose up into the fluffy grey clouds, vanishing behind them. Those flying creatures wheeled around the towers, and once I was close enough, I saw them to be massive flying lizards with long necks and tails. They were like nothing I'd seen before, really, not even on the television. Some beasts were red, some yellow, some green, some purple, some black, and some white. They flew in these brilliant aerobatic patterns that I could swear would put a swallow to shame. They dived through the clouds, almost touching the castle walls with their claws, before sharply veering upwards in the air. It was then, watching from a slight rise with a cooling breeze passing through my fur, that I saw humans were riding these things. They carried long staffs across their backs, with crystals just like the ones Astravar used to collect, affixed onto the top of them. Sometimes they took their short swords out of their sheaths at their hips, raised them up in the air, and swooped down with them. Other times one of them would lift the staff off of their back, pointed at the ground, and bathe the earth in brilliant displays of lightning, fire, and ice. I'd never seen anything that could do that. I mean, back in South Wales they had blocky machines that could create ice and blocky machines that could create fire. But they had to be closed to do so. And these staffs were creating brilliant effects all by themselves. I had to be dreaming. I also found the behavior of these people incredibly strange, even for humans. I mean, if you wanted to fly a creature like that, I would think you'd use it to get food. But they didn't seem to be trying to kill anything, but just attacking the ground and making pretty patterns on it. They brought nothing back from their hunts, not even a mouse. None of it made any sense. I tried to ignore them as I realized a place with so many people in it would also likely have a kitchen with lots of food. In fact, I could smell the aroma of some smoked fish coming from somewhere within. I sprinted towards the castle. The grass shortened as I approached, and I passed a stable with horses grazing outside. A scruffy-looking man was outside with the horses, tossing hay to one side of the wooden fence with a pitchfork. He had a strand of straw in his mouth with smelly smoke rising from the tip. The man glanced at me as I passed and uttered something. Not being human, of course, I didn't understand. I imagine he said something like, "Not seen too many of you fellows lately. We need a good mouser in the kitchens." But I have no evidence to suggest whether or not that is true. For all I know, he could have accused me of being one of the demon incarnations that Astravar had summoned up from his portals, although the man didn't seem afraid of me or anything like that. I passed over an open drawbridge, and I stopped before I stepped underneath the portcullis. There was water in the moat, and I hadn't drunk a drop all day. I lowered myself down the bank, steep for humans but not for cats, and I lapped up several mouthfuls of the freshest water I'd tasted for months. It had a tint of rose in it and was strangely warm. Several moments later, thoroughly hydrated, I found my way into the castle proper. There were people in there, hundreds of them. Some of them were sitting on a stone wall eating apples. Others, in pairs, sparred with each other with wooden swords, for who knows what reason. A man stood in the centre of the sword-wielders, shouting out at the top of his voice in a punctuated rhythm. He was loud, and so I didn't want to go anywhere near him. Instead, I passed through the courtyard and pushed my way through a heavy-looking door which was only slightly ajar. The corridors were cold and dusty, but I could smell my goal. The aroma of food was more intense than a chicken roast fresh out of the oven. There was fish, there was chicken, there was pork, there was beef, and I swear I even caught the whiff of rosemary. I entered the kitchen, ducking between the feet of men and women scurrying around. I found a rather stout-looking woman stirring something in a pot over a fire. I mewed at her, purring deep within my chest. Then she turned and looked at me. Her expression suddenly turned to one of disdain, and she shouted out something at me. She kicked me, and I shrieked back at her and swiped with my paw, ripping through the fabric of her trousers. She shouted out at me again and lurched at me with the spoon, dripping hot specks of a yellow mustardy sauce. But I darted away before she could hit me, finding my way between tangled feet and under the table. I couldn't find any scraps of food on the floor, so I scurried out of the kitchens and around the castle, looking out for a plate of something, sniffing around as I did. I stopped to spray a few times, of course, to let other cats know that a Bengal was now interested in this territory. Soon enough I found another door with some steps leading up a thin spiral staircase. I followed this upward and took the next room out to find another straight and dusty corridor. Along the left side edges of it, the stone peeled away into massive chambers. I turned into the first one, and I found a massive deer's carcass half-eaten on the floor, set in front of an opening, looking out towards the mountains in the distance. The brown roasted meat emitted this amazing smoky scent that drew me towards it like a magnet draws iron filings. I was so hungry I didn't even bother to check what else might be in the room. I sprinted over to the meat, tore an enormous chunk off one of its ribs, and started chewing it apart on the floor. Then there came a clear voice in my head. I'd never heard such a language before, but I understood it as clear as bowl water. It was as if a human was speaking inside my mind, and I could put meaning to every single word. "What in the seventh dimension do you think you are doing, youngling?" But that voice couldn't have belonged to anything, surely. I was starving and clearly hearing things. "You dare ignore a creature of magic? Look behind you, you fool!" I felt a sudden searing sensation of heat passing over my head, and a jet of flame hit the wall right in front of me. I shivered, and then I turned around and shrieked out of shock as hackles thrust out of my arched back. I looked right into a massive yellow eye, set into a red reptilian head which must have been around 5 times the size of me, if not more. "Finally," the voice said. It sounded like a female human, yet still low-pitched at that. "Now I am starting to see some well-deserved respect." 4. An unexpected find. I didn't know how to react to the beast that had somehow just spoken to me in my head. Up close it was like a creature out of nightmares I'd never imagined possible. It looked even more terrifying than the demon cheetah I'd imagined Astravar might have sent hunting me. The only lizard-like creatures I'd seen before were the newts and salamanders back in my former owner's garden back home. I would chase them through the grass sometimes, never really intending to kill them. They didn't look particularly appetizing, and so I'd release them and let them scurry back into the water. And then I'd go back to chasing butterflies instead. But I'd seen crocodiles on television with their macabre grins and ability to lurch out at people from the water. This beast was like a crocodile, except worse. She had sharp teeth along the side of her mouth, eyes that glowed bright yellow like miniature suns, huge front-loaded nostrils that didn't just steam but smoked, a breath that stank like rotting meat, and this strange fire burning at the back of her throat whenever she opened her mouth. Not to mention her sheer enormity. My first thought upon seeing her was that she must have had enough of the deer and now wanted to eat me for dinner. What I didn't consider at the time was that she would probably hate eating me for the same reason I hated eating mice. I backed up all the way to the drop and looked down at the landscape below. I was far too high up to jump down without injuring myself, even with my ability to land on all fours. Oh, come on, I can't...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?